Karen adjusted her navy blue uniform as she stood at the gate, scanning the crowd of passengers waiting to board Flight 237 from Chicago to Los Angeles. She had been a flight attendant for over 15 years, and while the job wasn't always glamorous, she took pride in what she did. Her role wasn't just about handing out peanuts or refilling drinks, it was about keeping people safe, making sure they followed the rules, and ensuring everyone on board felt comfortable during their journey. Today, however, Karen could already tell this flight might be different. The energy in the terminal seemed tense, almost electric. Passengers shuffled through the line with varying degrees of patience, some chatting loudly into their phones, others scrolling endlessly on their devices. Karen kept an eye on everything, her sharp gaze missing nothing. That's when she noticed him, a tall man with broad shoulders and a confident stride. He wore jeans, a plain white t-shirt, and a red Make America Great Again hat, perched firmly on his head. At first glance, he didn't seem out of place. Plenty of travelers dressed casually, especially on domestic flights like this one. But there was something about the way he carried himself that caught Karen's attention. His posture was relaxed yet commanding, as if he owned the space around him. As he approached the boarding desk, he exchanged a few words with the agent, flashing a wide grin that revealed perfectly straight teeth. The agent laughed politely, nodding as she handed him his boarding pass. Karen watched as the man walked toward the jet bridge. For reasons she couldn't quite explain, her stomach tightened. Maybe it was the hat. It wasn't uncommon to see political statements on clothing these days, but the MAGA slogan always sparked strong reactions, both positive and negative. Or maybe it was the way he moved with such ease, as though he belonged here more than anyone else. Whatever it was, Karen felt uneasy. Once all the passengers were seated, Karen began her usual routine. Standing near the front of the cabin, she demonstrated the safety procedures using hand gestures and pointed reminders. "Please ensure your seatbelt is securely fastened," she said clearly, her voice steady and professional. "In the event of an emergency, oxygen masks will drop from above. Secure your own mask before assisting others." The passengers listened, or pretended to, as she went through each step. When she reached the part about removing hats during takeoff, Karen glanced toward the man in the MAGA hat. Sure enough, he hadn't taken it off. Most people complied without question, either out of habit or respect for the rules. But this man simply sat there, leaning back slightly in his seat, his hat still firmly in place. Karen hesitated for a moment, debating whether to say anything. After all, it wasn't worth causing a scene over, right? Still, she knew ignoring it would set a bad precedent. Taking a deep breath, Karen approached him with a polite smile. "Excuse me, sir," she said, keeping her tone light but firm. "Could you please remove your hat for takeoff? It's one of our standard safety policies." The man looked up at her, his expression unreadable. For a brief second, Karen wondered if she'd made a mistake. Then slowly, he smiled. "This hat is part of who I am," he replied, his voice smooth and calm. There was no anger in his tone, no hint of aggression. Just a simple statement, delivered with quiet confidence. Karen blinked, thrown off by his response. She hadn't expected resistance, let alone such a deliberate answer. "I understand, sir," she said, trying to keep her composure. "But the rule applies to everyone, regardless of personal preferences." The man tilted his head slightly, studying her, as though weighing her words. Finally, he nodded. "All right," he said, surprising her. With deliberate slowness, he removed the hat and placed it on his lap. "Happy now?" Karen forced a smile, though she felt anything but happy. Something about the interaction left her unsettled. Was it the way he'd phrased his response, "Happy now"? It sounded almost mocking, though his demeanor remained friendly. Or was it the fact that he'd resisted in the first place, even briefly? Either way, Karen decided not to dwell on it. She had a job to do, and dwelling on one passenger wouldn't help her get it done. As the plane taxied down the runway, Karen busied herself with final checks, making sure luggage was stowed properly and seats were upright. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the man replace his hat once the plane lifted off the ground. Technically, he wasn't breaking any rules anymore. They were airborne, after all. but the gesture irritated her nonetheless. Why push back against something so small? What was the point? Karen tried to shake off the frustration as she prepared to serve drinks. This wasn't the first time she'd dealt with difficult passengers, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Still, there was something about this man that stuck with her, gnawing at the edges of her thoughts. She couldn't put her finger on it, but she sensed that their encounter was far from over. Later, as she pushed the beverage cart down the aisle, Karen stopped beside the man's seat. He greeted her with another easy smile, ordering a glass of whiskey. "You guys should really lighten up about these rules," he commented casually, his tone conversational rather than confrontational. Karen clenched her jaw, forcing herself to remain professional. "Rules exist for everyone's safety, sir," she replied, placing the drink on his tray table. "Safety, huh?" he mused, taking a sip of his whiskey. "Well, I suppose that makes sense. Doesn't mean I have to like it, though." His words lingered in Karen's mind long after she moved on to the next row. There was something oddly disarming about him, his charm, his confidence, the way he seemed to challenge authority without ever raising his voice. Yet beneath the surface, Karen sensed a deeper layer, something she couldn't quite define. Whatever it was, it made her uneasy. By the time the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, Karen found herself stealing glances at the man whenever she thought he wasn't looking. Each time, she caught snippets of his behavior, the way he chatted amiably with the woman seated beside him, the casual manner in which he adjusted his hat, the occasional smirk that played across his lips. None of it added up to anything concrete, but the pieces refused to fit together neatly in Karen's mind. And so, as the hours passed and the flight continued smoothly, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that this man was more than he appeared. Whether that feeling stemmed from paranoia, intuition, or something else entirely, she couldn't say. All she knew was that their paths were destined to cross again, and when they did, things might not go as smoothly as they had so far. As the flight continued, Karen tried to focus on her duties, but her mind kept drifting back to the man in the MAGA hat. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was testing her, pushing boundaries in ways she hadn't encountered before. It wasn't just his refusal to follow the rules. It was the way he did it with such calm confidence, as if he knew exactly what buttons to press. Every time their eyes met, even briefly, Karen felt a strange mix of frustration and curiosity bubbling inside her. The drink service went smoothly for the most part, though Karen noticed how the man's casual comments about the rules seemed to draw attention from nearby passengers. A few people chuckled at his remarks, while others exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to react. Karen did her best to ignore it all, delivering snacks and refilling cups with practiced efficiency. But when she reached the rear of the plane, she allowed herself a moment to exhale deeply. This was going to be a long flight. It wasn't until the second round of beverage service that things took a turn. As Karen made her way down the aisle again, she spotted the elderly woman seated directly behind the man, leaning forward slightly, her face pinched with discomfort. Karen slowed her pace, observing more closely. The man had reclined his seat fully, leaving almost no room for the woman to move. Her tray table was tilted awkwardly, and she clutched a paperback book tightly, in one hand clearly struggling to find a comfortable position. Karen frowned. While reclining seats were standard on airplanes, courtesy dictated that passengers consider those around them. And this situation? This was anything but courteous. Determined to address the issue, Karen approached the man's row with a polite smile. "Excuse me, sir," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "I noticed your seat is reclined quite far back. Would you mind adjusting it slightly? It seems to be causing some difficulty for the passenger behind you." The man turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Karen thought he might argue or brush her off entirely. Instead, he leaned back further into his seat, stretching his arms above his head dramatically. "Ah, I see," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "So now you're policing my comfort too?" Karen blinked, caught off guard by his response. She hadn't expected him to take offense so quickly. "That's not what I meant, sir," she replied, trying to stay calm. It's just that what?" he interrupted, raising an eyebrow. You want me to sit up straight, like a good little boy, is that it? His words drew stares from nearby passengers. Some looked sympathetic toward Karen, while others appeared amused by the exchange. Karen felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she refused to let him rattle her. Taking a deep breath, she softened her tone. Sir, I'm only asking because the passenger behind you seems uncomfortable. We encourage everyone to be mindful of their fellow travelers. The man glanced over his shoulder at the elderly woman who quickly averted her gaze, pretending to read her book. He turned back to Karen, his lips curling into a smirk. Well, isn't that sweet? He said mockingly, but last I checked, I paid for this seat, same as everyone else. If she wanted more legroom, maybe she should have sprung for first class. Karen clenched her fists beneath the edge of the beverage cart, fighting the urge to snap back. She reminded herself that losing her temper wouldn't solve anything. It would only escalate the situation. Still, his dismissive attitude grated on her nerves. Sir, she said firmly, this isn't about money. It's about basic courtesy. Could you please adjust your seat? For a moment, the man stared at her, his blue eyes piercing. Then, without warning, he released the recline lever, allowing the seat to snap upright. The sudden movement startled the elderly woman, who let out a small gasp. There, he said, leaning back with exaggerated nonchalance. Happy now? Karen forced a tight smile, though her jaw was clenched so hard she feared it might crack. Thank you, sir, she managed to say before moving on to the next row. As she walked away, she could feel his eyes boring into her back, watching her every step. The encounter left her rattled, her pulse racing faster than it should have been. By the time she finished serving the remaining passengers, Karen's mood had soured considerably. Normally, she enjoyed chatting with travelers, learning snippets of their lives through brief conversations. Today, however, she found herself distracted, replaying the interaction with the man over and over in her mind. Why had he been so resistant? Why did he seem to thrive on challenging her authority? And why, despite his infuriating behavior, did she feel a nagging sense of intrigue? When the snack service concluded, Karen retreated to the galley to tidy up. She busied herself restocking napkins and sorting empty cups, anything to keep her hands occupied. Her co-worker, Lisa, joined her a few minutes later, noticing immediately that something was wrong. You okay? Lisa asked, her brow furrowing. You look like you've seen a ghost. Karen sighed, setting down a stack of plastic cups. It's nothing, she muttered, though the lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Just one of the passengers is being difficult. Lisa raised an eyebrow. Difficult how? Karen hesitated, unsure how much to share. Finally, she shrugged. He's rude, disrespectful, and doesn't care about anyone else's comfort. Oh, and he's wearing a MAGA hat. Lisa winced sympathetically. Oof, that sounds rough. You want me to handle him next time? No, Karen said quickly, surprising even herself. No, it's fine, I can deal with it. Lisa studied her for a moment longer before nodding. All right, just don't let him get under your skin, okay? People like that feed off drama. Karen nodded absently, though she knew Lisa's advice was easier said than done. The man already was under her skin, burrowing deeper with each passing minute. She couldn't explain why, but something about him unsettled her on a fundamental level. Maybe it was the way he challenged her professionalism, forcing her to question her own reactions. Or maybe it was the flicker of amusement in his eyes, whenever they clashed, as if he found the whole thing entertaining. As the hours dragged on, Karen did her best to avoid the man, focusing instead on assisting other passengers. She helped a mother soothe the fussy toddler, retrieved a dropped e-reader from beneath a seat, and reassured a nervous traveler during a bout of turbulence. Each task provided a temporary distraction, pulling her thoughts away from the tension simmering in the cabin. Yet no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't completely escape the feeling that the man was watching her, waiting for another opportunity to push her buttons. Eventually, the plane began its descent into Los Angeles. Karen announced the arrival procedure over the intercom, reminding passengers to return their trays to the upright position and stow any loose items. As she moved through the cabin, double-checking seatbelts and overhead bins, she stopped near the man's brow once more. His hat was back on his head, pulled low over his forehead as he gazed out the window. For a fleeting moment, Karen considered saying something, anything, to break the unspoken tension between them. But then she thought better of it, deciding it wasn't worth risking another confrontation. When the plane finally touched down, Karen exhaled a sigh of relief. She stood by the exit door, offering polite goodbyes to disembarking passengers. Most smiled and thanked her, while others hurried past without a word. The man in the MAGA hat lingered near the end of the line, pausing beside her as he reached the doorway. "You're welcome," he said suddenly, his voice soft but clear. Karen blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" "For putting up with me," he clarified, tipping his hat slightly. "You handled yourself well, better than most would have." Before Karen could respond, he stepped off the plane and disappeared into the crowd. Standing there, stunned, she realized she didn't even know his name. Though the flight was over, Karen couldn't stop thinking about the man. His final words haunted her, lingering in her mind long after the plane had emptied. Was it possible she'd misjudged him? Had he simply been testing her limits, seeing how far she'd go to enforce the rules? Or was there something else, something deeper, driving his behavior? Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: Karen wouldn't forget this flight anytime soon. The next morning, Karen woke up feeling unusually restless. She had hoped that a good night's sleep would help her forget about the strange encounter on Flight 237, but instead, the memory of the man in the MAGA hat lingered like an unwelcome shadow. Every time she closed her eyes, she could picture his confident smirk, hear his calm yet challenging tone. It was as if he had planted a seed of doubt in her mind, making her question whether she'd handled the situation correctly. By the time she arrived at work, Karen decided to file a report with her supervisor. She didn't want to make a big deal out of it. She just needed to document what had happened in case the passenger complained or caused trouble for other crew members. As she walked into the office, she spotted her supervisor, Mr. Collins, sitting at his desk reviewing paperwork. He looked up when he saw her and gestured for her to take a seat. "Morning, Karen," he said with a warm smile. "What can I do for you?" Karen hesitated for a moment, unsure how to begin. Finally, she launched into an explanation of the events from the previous day. She described the man's refusal to remove his hat during takeoff, his sarcastic comments about the rules, and the incident with the reclined seat. She kept her tone professional, sticking to the facts without letting her emotions take over. Mr. Collins listened intently, nodding occasionally as she spoke. But as Karen recounted the details, she noticed something odd, a flicker of unease, crossing his face. At first, she thought she might be imagining it. After all, Mr. Collins was known for being supportive and level-headed. Yet as she finished her story, his expression grew increasingly troubled. "Is everything all right?" Karen asked, frowning slightly. "Did I do something wrong?" Morose Collins leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as though trying to gather his thoughts. No, you didn't do anything wrong," he assured her quickly. "But there's something you should know." Karen's stomach tightened. Whatever Mr. Collins was about to say, it clearly wasn't good news. She braced herself, gripping the edge of her seat. "That passenger, the one wearing the MAGA hat, he wasn't just some ordinary traveler," Mr. Collins explained slowly. "His name is William Harper. He owns Skyline Airlines." For a moment, Karen felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. Her mouth went dry and her heart began to race. William Harper? The same William Harper who had built Skyline Airlines from the ground up, turning it into one of the most successful carriers in the country? The man whose name appeared on every employee handbook, every paycheck stub. I didn't realize." Karen stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "He never introduced himself or mentioned who he was." Mr. Collins sighed, leaning forward to rest his elbows on the desk. "That's because he travels incognito sometimes. He likes to observe operations firsthand, see how things are running without drawing attention to himself. It's not uncommon for him to test employees, to push boundaries and see how they react. Karen's mind reeled. All those moments when she'd clashed with the man suddenly took on a new meaning. His resistance to the rules, his sharp comments, even his final words before disembarking, it hadn't just been personal. He had been testing her, evaluating her performance under pressure, and she had no idea. "Does this mean I'm in trouble?" Karen asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Am I going to lose my job?" To her surprise, Mr. Collins shook his head, firmly. "Not necessarily," he replied. "William Harper values professionalism and dedication. From what you've told me, you stood your ground and handled the situation with integrity. That's exactly what he looks for in employees." Karen exhaled a shaky breath, relief washing over her, but only partially. Even if she wasn't in immediate danger of losing her job, the realization that she had unknowingly crossed paths with such a powerful figure left her shaken. What if she had reacted differently? What if she had lost her temper or let her frustration get the better of her? "How often does he do this?" Karen asked cautiously. "Travel incognito, I mean." Mr. Collins shrugged. "Hard to say. Sometimes. It's once a month, sometimes less frequently. He doesn't announce his plans, so we rarely know until after the fact. But when he does travel, he pays close attention to how staff interact with passengers and each other." Karen nodded slowly. Absorbing the information, she couldn't help but wonder how many other employees had faced similar tests without realizing it. How many had passed, or failed, without ever knowing the stakes? Over the next few days, Karen found herself replaying the conversation with Mr. Collins over and over in her mind. She analyzed every detail of her interaction with William Harper, scrutinizing her words and actions for any sign of weakness. Had she come across as too confrontational, too rigid? Or had she struck the right balance between assertiveness and diplomacy? Her colleagues noticed the change in her demeanor. Lisa, her co-worker from the flight, pulled her aside during a break one afternoon. "You've been acting weird lately," Lisa said bluntly. "What's going on?" Karen hesitated, unsure how much to share. Finally, she decided to confide in Lisa, explaining what she had learned about William Harper and the potential implications for her career. To her relief, Lisa listened patiently, offering words of encouragement rather than judgment. "You're overthinking this," Lisa said gently, once she heard the whole story. "From what you've told me, you handled yourself exactly the way you were supposed to. If anything, Harper probably respects you for standing your ground." "But what if he doesn't?" Karen countered, her voice tinged with anxiety. "What if he thinks I was too harsh or unprofessional?" Lisa placed a reassuring hand on Karen's shoulder. "Then you'll deal with it if it happens. Until then, stop driving yourself crazy. You did your job and you did it well. That's all anyone can ask for." Though Lisa's words provided some comfort, Karen still struggled to shake the nagging sense of uncertainty. She couldn't ignore the fact that William Harper held immense power, not just over Skyline Airlines but over her livelihood. One wrong move, one misstep, and her career could be in jeopardy. Determined to regain control of the situation, Karen decided to take proactive steps. She reviewed the company's policies on customer service and conflict resolution, brushing up on best practices for handling difficult passengers. She also reached out to a mentor within the airline, a senior flight attendant named Patricia, who had years of experience dealing with high-profile individuals. Patricia listened carefully as Karen recounted the events of Flight 237 and her subsequent discovery about William Harper. When Karen finished speaking, Patricia offered thoughtful advice. "The key is to stay calm and composed no matter what," she said. "People like Harper, they don't just care about whether you follow the rules. They care about how you handle yourself when things get tough. Show them that you're capable of adapting without compromising your principles." Karen nodded, taking Patricia's words to heart. Over the following weeks, she made a conscious effort to apply these lessons in her daily interactions with passengers. Whether it was diffusing tension between quarreling travelers or addressing complaints with patience and empathy, she approached each challenge with renewed focus and determination. Despite her efforts, however, Karen couldn't escape the lingering fear that William Harper might cross her path again. Would he recognize her? Would he remember their encounter? And if he did, how would he respond? One evening, as Karen prepared for another flight, she received an email from corporate headquarters. The subject line read, "Request for meeting." Her heart sank as she opened the message, scanning the contents quickly. It was brief and to the point. Karen was summoned to a meeting the following day to discuss recent operational observations. Panic gripped her chest as she stared at the screen. This was it, the moment of reckoning. Whatever William Harper had observed during their flight, whatever conclusions he had drawn, she was about to face the consequences. As she lay in bed that night, Karen's mind raced with possibilities. Would she be reprimanded, promoted, fired on the spot? She tossed and turned, unable to quiet her thoughts. By the time dawn broke, she felt exhausted, but also strangely resolved. Whatever happened, she told herself, she would face it head on.
She had done her job to the best of her ability, and that was all she could ask of herself. Little did Karen know, the meeting ahead would bring surprises far beyond anything she had imagined.
The morning of the meeting, Karen woke up earlier than usual. She spent extra time getting ready, choosing her uniform carefully and making sure every detail was perfect. Her hair was neatly tied back, her shoes polished to a shine. She wanted to look as professional as possible, even though she knew appearances wouldn't change the outcome of the meeting. Still, it gave her a small sense of control in an otherwise uncertain situation. As she drove to corporate headquarters, Karen tried to calm her nerves by rehearsing what she would say. She reminded herself that she had followed protocol during the flight, handled the passenger respectfully, and prioritized the safety and comfort of everyone on board. If William Harper, or anyone else, questioned her actions, she could defend them with confidence. But no matter how many times she repeated these thoughts, the knot in her stomach refused to loosen. When she arrived at the sleek glass building that housed Airline's main offices, Karen checked in at the front desk and was escorted to a conference room on the top floor. The room was spacious and brightly lit, with large windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. A long wooden table dominated the center of the space, surrounded by high-backed chairs. At one end of the table sat William Harper himself. Karen froze for a moment when she saw him. He looked different out of context, dressed in a tailored suit instead of casual clothes, his MAGA hat replaced by a neatly combed head of silver-streaked hair. Yet his presence was just as commanding as it had been on the plane. His piercing, blue eyes locked onto hers as she entered the room, and for a brief second, Karen felt like a deer caught in headlights. "Good morning, Karen," William said, his voice calm and measured. "Please have a seat." Karen nodded stiffly, forcing herself to walk toward the chair he indicated. As she sat down, she noticed two other executives seated nearby, their expressions unreadable. One of them was Mr. Collins, who offered her a small, reassuring smile. The other was a woman Karen didn't recognize, though her nameplate identified her as Susan Meyer, Vice President of Operations. "Thank you for coming," Susan began, speaking in a tone that was both formal and friendly. "We wanted to discuss your recent experience on Flight 237, specifically your interaction with a certain passenger." Karen swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. "Of course," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. "I'm happy to answer any questions." William leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. "Let's start with the basics," he said. "How did you feel about the passenger's behavior during the flight?" Karen hesitated, unsure how honest she should be. Finally, she decided to stick to the truth. "At first I thought he was being difficult," she admitted. "He resisted following some of the rules, like removing his hat during takeoff and reclining his seat too far back. It made me uneasy because I wasn't sure if he was deliberately trying to provoke me or if he simply didn't care about the policies." William nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And how did you respond?" "I did my best to remain professional," Karen explained. "I reminded him of the rules and asked him to comply. When he pushed back, I tried to explain why the rules were important. not just for his safety but for the comfort of other passengers too. Susan interjected at this point, her tone gentle but probing. Did you ever feel like you were losing control of the situation? Karen considered the question carefully before answering. There were moments when I felt frustrated, she admitted. But I reminded myself that my job is to enforce the rules fairly and consistently, no matter who the passenger is. I didn't want to let my emotions get in the way. William exchanged a glance with Susan, and Karen couldn't help but wonder what they were thinking. Was her response enough? Had she said the right things? After a pause, William spoke again. You handled yourself well under pressure, he said, surprising her. Not everyone would have stayed so composed in your position. Most employees either cave completely or become overly aggressive when faced with resistance. You found a middle ground, which is exactly what we're looking for in our team. Karen blinked, taken aback by his praise. Thank you, she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. I just try to do my job the best I can. That much is clear, William continued. But there's always room for improvement. For example, while assertiveness is important, diplomacy can sometimes go a long way. Did you notice how the passenger reacted when you softened your tone later in the flight? Karen thought back to their final exchange before landing, the way he had tipped his hat and thanked her for handling herself well. Yes, she said slowly. It seemed like he appreciated the effort to stay calm and respectful. Exactly, William said, leaning back in his chair. People respond differently depending on how you approach them. Even someone who seems confrontational might soften if you show understanding and patience. That doesn't mean you should compromise on the rules. It means finding ways to communicate more effectively. Karen nodded, absorbing his words. She realized now that her initial reaction to the man had been defensive, almost instinctive. She had focused on enforcing the rules without considering how her delivery might affect the outcome. In hindsight, she could see where she might have handled things differently. Susan chimed in again, her tone supportive. We're not here to criticize you, Karen. Far from it. We want to help you grow and develop as a leader within the company. Your dedication to your role is evident, and that's something we value highly. Karen felt a wave of relief wash over her, though she still had questions. Does this mean I'm not in trouble? She asked cautiously. William chuckled softly, shaking his head. Not at all. In fact, quite the opposite. You passed a test most employees don't even realize they're taking. Your ability to stand your ground while maintaining professionalism impressed me. It's a rare quality and one we need more of in this industry. Karen exhaled deeply, feeling as though a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. I appreciate that, she said, sincerely. I'll keep working to improve, especially in areas where I might have fallen short. That's all we ask, Susan added with a warm smile. Growth is a continuous process, and we're here to support you every step of the way. The rest of the meeting focused on practical advice for handling challenging situations in the future. William shared stories from his own experiences traveling incognito, highlighting key moments where employees had excelled or struggled in similar scenarios. He emphasized the importance of empathy, adaptability, and clear communication, qualities he believed set great leaders apart from good ones. By the time the meeting ended, Karen felt a renewed sense of purpose. What had started as a nerve-wracking confrontation had transformed into an opportunity for growth. She left the conference room with a clearer understanding of her strengths and weaknesses, as well as actionable steps to become a better version of herself. As she walked back to her car, Karen reflected on everything that had happened. Meeting William Harper face-to-face had been intimidating, but it had also been enlightening. She now understood why he traveled incognito, not to catch employees slipping up, but to identify those who truly embodied the values of the airline. And while she hadn't been perfect, she had proven herself capable of rising to the challenge. For the first time in days, Karen allowed herself to smile. Whatever the future held, she knew she was ready to face it head-on. In the days following her meeting with William Harper, Karen found herself reflecting deeply on the lessons she had learned. At first, She had been overwhelmed by the realization that one of the most powerful men in the aviation industry had personally observed and judged her performance. But as time passed, she began to see the experience not as a source of anxiety, but as an opportunity for growth. She realized that while perfection was impossible, improvement was always within reach. Karen started small, focusing on the advice William and Susan had given her during the meeting. One of the key takeaways was the importance of balancing assertiveness with empathy. She had always prided herself on being firm when enforcing rules, but now she understood that how she communicated those rules mattered just as much, if not more, than the rules themselves. With this in mind, she began practicing new ways to approach difficult passengers. On her next flight, Karen encountered a man who refused to turn off his phone during takeoff. Instead of immediately confronting him, she approached his seat with a calm smile. "I know it's tempting to stay connected," she said gently, "but turning off your phone helps ensure everyone's safety. Would you mind switching it off for me?" To her surprise, the man complied without argument, even offering an apologetic nod. It was a minor victory, but it gave Karen a sense of accomplishment. She noticed that by framing her request as a shared responsibility rather than a strict command, she could often diffuse tension before it escalated. Encouraged by this success, Karen decided to expand her efforts. She enrolled in a conflict resolution workshop offered by Airlines, eager to learn techniques for handling high-pressure situations. The course covered everything from active listening to de-escalation strategies, and Karen soaked up every lesson like a sponge. She practiced role-playing scenarios with her classmates, imagining how she might respond to various types of challenging passengers, from the angry complainer to the indifferent rule breaker. Through these exercises, Karen discovered something unexpected. She enjoyed helping others navigate conflicts. Her natural ability to remain calm under pressure made her a valuable asset in group discussions, and her classmates often turned to her for guidance. Inspired by this newfound confidence, Karen began mentoring new hires at the airline, sharing insights she had gained through years of experience and her recent encounter with William Harper. Her mentees were eager to learn from her, especially after hearing about her run-in with the company owner. Word had spread quickly among employees about Karen's meeting with William, though she downplayed the details whenever anyone asked. Still, the story became a sort of legend within the ranks, inspiring others to strive for excellence in their own roles. Some saw Karen as proof that standing your ground, even against powerful figures, could lead to positive outcomes if done with integrity and professionalism. Meanwhile, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that William Harper was keeping tabs on her progress. Though they hadn't interacted since the meeting, she occasionally received anonymous notes of encouragement through HR. These messages were brief but meaningful, praising her efforts to grow and reminding her of the impact she was making within the company. While Karen never confirmed whether William was behind them, she suspected he was watching her development closely. One evening, after a particularly long day of training sessions and mentoring, Karen sat down at her kitchen table with a cup of tea. She pulled out a notebook she had recently started using to jot down thoughts and reflections. Flipping to a blank page, she wrote, "Today, I realized that challenges aren't obstacles. They're opportunities. Every difficult passenger, every tense situation is a chance to become better at what I do. I used to think that being professional meant never showing emotion, but now I understand that true professionalism comes from connecting with people, even when it's hard." As she closed the notebook, Karen felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the lessons she had learned, but for the support she had received along the way. Her colleagues, her mentors, and even William Harper himself had played a role in helping her grow. For the first time in her career, she felt truly confident in her abilities. The weeks turned into months, and Karen continued to excel in her role. Passengers praised her for her warmth and attentiveness, while co-workers admired her leadership skills. She became known as someone who could handle any situation with grace and poise, earning the nickname "the Calmer" among her peers. Even Mr. Collins remarked on her transformation, telling her during a routine check-in that she was setting an example for the entire team. Despite her success, Karen remained humble. She knew that no matter how skilled she became, there would always be moments of uncertainty, passengers who tested her patience and flights that left her exhausted. But instead of fearing these challenges, she embraced them, viewing each one as a stepping stone on her journey toward becoming the best version of herself. One afternoon, while preparing for yet another international flight, Karen received an email from corporate headquarters. It was brief and to the point, inviting her to attend an upcoming leadership summit for top-performing employees. The message ended with a single line: "Your dedication has not gone unnoticed." Karen stared at the screen, her heart swelling with pride. She knew this invitation wasn't just a reward for her hard work, it was a recognition of her potential. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them head-on, armed with the knowledge that growth came not from avoiding difficulties, but from embracing them. As she boarded the plane later that day, Karen felt a renewed sense of purpose. She greeted passengers with her usual warm smile, checked seatbelts and overhead bins with meticulous care, and handled requests with patience and kindness. Though she didn't know it yet, this flight would bring her full circle, connecting her past experiences with the person she had become. And somewhere in the back of her mind, Karen wondered if William Harper might be watching again, not to test her, but to see how far she had come. Months passed and Karen's life settled into a rhythm of growth and gratitude. She had embraced the lessons from her encounter with William Harper, transforming them into tools that helped her navigate the complexities of her job. Each flight brought new challenges, but Karen faced them with a calm confidence that earned her respect from passengers and colleagues alike. Her reputation as the calmer spread beyond her immediate team, and she became something of a role model within Skyline Airlines. One evening, Karen found herself working on a long-haul international flight from Los Angeles to London. It was a route she rarely worked, reserved for senior crew members due to its length and complexity. As she stood by the boarding gate, scanning the crowd of passengers, a familiar face caught her eye. A tall man wearing a baseball cap emblazoned with the Skyline Airlines logo. At first, Karen thought she was imagining things, but as he approached the jet bridge, there was no mistaking it. It was William Harper. Her heart skipped a beat. Was this another test? Had he come to observe her again? Karen forced herself to remain composed, reminding herself of everything she had learned since their last meeting. If William was here to evaluate her, she would show him just how much she had grown. As the flight got underway, Karen went about her duties with quiet efficiency. She greeted passengers warmly, served meals with care, and ensured everyone followed safety protocols. When she reached William's row during the initial beverage service, she paused briefly, steeling herself before addressing him. "Good evening, Mr. Harper," she said softly, surprising him. He looked up from his book, his eyebrows rising in mild amusement. Well, he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "I see my cover's been blown." Karen returned his smile, though her cheeks flushed slightly. "It's hard not to recognize you after our last meeting," she admitted. "Thank you again for helping me become a better version of myself." William chuckled, setting his book aside. "You've already done most of the work," he replied. "I just pointed you in the right direction." Karen nodded, feeling a surge of pride mixed with humility. "Still, your feedback meant a lot to me. I've been trying to apply what I learned, not just on flights, but in my interactions with coworkers too." "That's good to hear," William said, his tone thoughtful. "Leadership isn't just about managing others, it's about inspiring them. And from what I've seen, you're doing exactly that." Karen felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't realized William had been keeping such close tabs on her progress, or that he viewed her as a leader. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice steady despite the emotion swirling inside her. "That means a lot coming from you." The rest of the flight unfolded smoothly, with Karen occasionally stealing glances at William from across the cabin. Unlike their previous encounter, there was no tension between them, only mutual respect. When turbulence hit midway through the journey, causing some passengers to panic, Karen handled the situation with practiced ease. She moved through the cabin, offering reassurance and calming nervous travelers with her steady presence. William watched her closely, nodding approvingly as she navigated each challenge with grace. By the time the plane began its descent into Heathrow Airport, Karen felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This flight had been one of her best yet, and, knowing that William had witnessed it, made the achievement feel even more significant. As passengers disembarked, Karen stood by the exit door, offering polite goodbyes and thanking them for flying with Skyline Airlines. When William reached the doorway, he paused, tipping his baseball cap slightly. "You've come a long way, Karen," he said, his voice warm and sincere. "Keep leading by example. The sky's the limit for someone like you." Karen smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Harper, for everything." With that, William stepped off the plane and disappeared into the bustling terminal. Karen watched him go, feeling a profound sense of closure. Their journey together, from the tense confrontation on Flight 237 to this moment of mutual respect, had come full circle. What had started as a test of her professionalism had evolved into a partnership of growth and understanding. In the weeks that followed, Karen continued to excel in her role, drawing inspiration from her experiences with William Harper. She mentored new hires with renewed enthusiasm, sharing not only technical skills but also the importance of empathy and adaptability. Her Leadership Summit invitation arrived shortly afterward, and she attended with pride, soaking up insights from industry experts and fellow top performers. At the summit, Karen delivered a speech about her journey, recounting her clash with William Harper and the lessons she had learned along the way. Her story resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom approached her afterward to express admiration for her resilience and determination. One attendee summed it up perfectly. "You turned a challenge into a stepping stone. That's true leadership." Back at work, Karen carried this newfound recognition with humility. She knew that no matter how far she had come, there would always be room to grow. Each flight presented fresh opportunities to connect with people, solve problems, and make a difference in small but meaningful ways. Years later, when Karen reflected on her career, she realized that her encounter with William Harper had been a turning point. It wasn't just about surviving a difficult passenger or impressing a powerful figure. It was about embracing challenges as chances to evolve. She had learned to see beyond surface-level appearances, whether it was a divisive symbol like a MAGA hat or a seemingly ordinary traveler incognito. By focusing on the person beneath, she had discovered a deeper truth. Every interaction, no matter how challenging, held the potential for growth. Karen retired from Skyline Airlines decades later, leaving behind a legacy of excellence and compassion. Her story became part of the company's training materials, shared with new employees as an example of how to handle adversity with dignity and grace. And though she never saw William Harper again after that final flight, she often thought of him with gratitude for pushing her to be better, for believing in her potential, and for showing her that even the toughest encounters could lead to meaningful change. As Karen settled into retirement, surrounded by memories of skies crossed and lives touched, she smiled to herself. She had started as a flight attendant enforcing rules, but she had ended as a leader inspiring others, and in the end that was the greatest reward of all.